Right. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome. Thank you.
Actually, Sam, I'm going to ask you to explain to our audience, what is a forensic accountant?
People hear forensic accountant, they think it has something to do with dead bodies.
Yes.
Forensic accounting is similar to forensic medicine, and it has to do with the law. Forensic sometimes means debatable.
Okay.
It's that portion of accounting which is subject to dispute. It'll be subject to cross-examination, it'll be subject to attorney's review.
Okay. Now, is that something people specialize in, or is that something you kind of develop, skills from just doing the work?
Well, at our firm, we concentrate our practice. We're a boutique accounting firm. We concentrate our practice in litigation services or forensic accounting. I'm chairman of the Litigation Services Committee of the CPA Society in New Jersey, and that's the area that I choose to practice in. I didn't always practice in exclusively forensic accounting.
Now, I know white-collar crime has been around probably since the beginning of time, actually. But I guess to the country, most of us became familiar with this in a big way was through the Watergate scandal. Would you say that was kind of one of the real major cases that kind of opened up this whole area of white-collar crime, being the fact that it went to the White House, or is there some other point in history we should be aware of?
At least in my mind, I think white-collar crime may have originated with tax fraud cases.
Okay.
Or maybe even before then in company embezzlement schemes,
okay,
employee embezzlement schemes, or commercial enterprise fraud.
Okay, Peter, why don't you come in here? How do you
Al, the evolution of white-collar crime has really come from the commercial sector. The commercial sector being businesses being operated, from the simplest bookkeeper who might be embezzling funds from their boss, to someone who might be working in a brokerage house, who might be going and trading stock on an insider trading basis. The most recent example of that, of course, and most notorious, was Michael Milken. Mm-hmm. That is one of the classic white-collar so-called crime cases because it involves the trading of securities.
Now, Michael is still in prison, am I correct?
That's correct.
All right, could we go back and just for our audience, just tell them a little bit about the Milken case?
Michael Milken and others were charged with having traded stock based upon insider information, that there was a conspiracy among many people in the brokerage industry to get information, collect that information, and share it just between them, and stock was traded.
Is this like the white-collar crime story that we see in the movie Wall Street, where we had Michael Douglas, who was the star of that? Is that similar?
I think Wall Street tried to depict
okay,
a lot of things. I think my personal view of it was they tried to depict what Wall Street was about. There are many, many fine people on Wall Street who operate pursuant to the rules mm-hmm, of the Securities and Exchange Commission, but that's a typical white-collar situation.
Okay, is this crime in this area growing? Anyway.
Oh, I think it's growing phenomenally, and I think as a result of it seems that the incidence of white-collar crime, and all crime in general, increases as a result of the recession.
Okay.
I think it's interesting to note to your viewers that the losses that result from white-collar crime are substantially in excess of the losses that result from other crime on a per-incident basis. The average loss on a white-collar crime, average loss from fraud in the nation, I read some statistics, totaled about $25,000 per incident, mm-hmm, whereas the average loss from a burglary, for instance, averages $250
okay,
per incident.
Now, where does the S&L crisis fit in this? Is that a white-collar crime? How do we see that? I mean,
absolutely. Well, some of the S&L crisis results from white-collar crime, and some of the S&L crisis results from natural business downturn. As a result of the business downturn, some loans that the S&Ls made did go bad, but some of it results from white-collar crime. I was involved in a case where individuals at a savings and loan were acquiring land that was mortgaged by the savings and loan, and as the land was being developed by the savings and loan developers, they had their land approved in advance and were able to reap enormous profits as a result of their inside knowledge. They formed a company called GRQ, for Get Rich Quick. And that was a incidence of fraud and insider information similar to Milken that lined the pockets of officers at a savings loan.
Now, let me ask you, Peter, maybe you can give us an example of a real simple white-collar crime. I mean, is it really when somebody, kind of has some pilferage and takes some of the, stationary home, or is it something else that's a little bit more to it?
Well, Al, white-collar crime has gotten more recent recognition as a very, very serious crime. The difference between white-collar crime and other crimes are generally viewed as crimes of violence. White-collar crime traditionally wasn't viewed as a crime of violence, but more of a financial crime. It really crossed socioeconomic boundaries, but there were certain groups of people who were more prosperous, who were able to participate in white-collar crime.
I think, to me, the major distinction between white-collar crime is that when it's committed, nobody knows, as opposed to other crimes.
It's often been said by many that white-collar crime is no different from ordinary crime. If a crime is committed with a gun, white-collar crime is committed with a pen. That's the clearest example. An example of white-collar crime that has occurred very frequently, again in the banks. There was one case we were involved with in our firm. A lady was working as a floor manager in one of the banks in the city of Newark. This bank put out a promotion saying that for every savings account that you opened, the bank would give you $10. The cards were executed by the depositors. The lady who was working the floor as a bank representative would take the cards from the people. The people were unwitting, didn't know. She would cash the $10 cards and retrieve the $10. She was prosecuted by the United States Attorney's Office, and this is several years ago, as having committed a fraud against a banking institution in this country.
Okay, now, so greed, does that seem to be one of the major motivations for this type of crime?
I agree with Sam. It's absolutely economically motivated. People get themselves into situations where they're living way above their means and ability to live, and they seek other bases. All the while, the common thread is they all believe, in my experience in white-collar crime, that they'll probably be able to return the money to the company or institution.
Absolutely.
And
Yes,
I think in every case of embezzlement that I've been involved in, it starts out with the employee believing that he'll take just a little bit and he'll pay it back. He almost considers it a loan.
Yeah, now the guy we had who was the former producer of Wide World Sports for ABC, he was involved, Chet Forte, and actually lives here in our state. And didn't he decide in the end, or wasn't the case decided based on the fact that he was going to return a tremendous amount of the money because he was able to restore it, that his penalty was reduced substantially? Or?
And therein lies the difference which the Congress of the United States has recently tried to deal with in terms of the uniformity of penalties between crimes of violence and white-collar crimes. There was a time when white-collar criminals very often received very lenient sentences because of their station in society, whereas violent criminals, of course, needed rehabilitation. The Congress has now started to equalize that situation through a body of law called the Federal Sentencing Guidelines, where corporate officials today, if they do not disclose or if they discover that crimes have been committed within their corporations, and of course against the stockholders, if they do not openly disclose it immediately, the corporations themselves, their officers, could be subject to criminal indictment.
But Peter, wouldn't you feel that a lot of this has to do with that one is a street confrontation, and the other one is more in the conference room, and because of the lifestyle and the particular background of the type of people that are involved in white-collar crime, that we still have not been able to figure out how we want to deal with white-collar crime, where we know, if we look in our prisons, that the street criminals, make up most of the prison population.
Well, it's easy because the street criminals are perpetrating crimes against people who are aware of the crimes, and there's an instantaneous reaction to a wrongdoing, whereas the white-collar criminal is perpetrating a crime, and the individual or the business enterprises which suffers the loss from that crime may not be aware of the loss for many, many years.
Let's talk about Leona Helmsley. How did you view that case? I mean, this is what I consider kind of a sensational case of a person who had tremendous wealth. But, you know, I mean, is she getting fair treatment given, you know, your background and your experience?
Well, as an accountant and as a practicing general CPA, CPA in general practice for many years before I started in litigation services, I prepared many tax returns for many businessmen, and many businessmen seem to have perpetrated the same kind of tax fraud that I read about Leona Helmsley perpetrating. The primary difference, I think, is the extent to which she perpetrated these frauds.
So do we just make her an example, or is it unfair?
I think a large part of the public, Al, thought that she was made a spectacle of. But I think if you were to speak to the members of the U.S. Attorney's Office in New York, they would say to you that the civil end of IRS, as opposed to the criminal division, had made many offers or proposals to her, so the media reported, to try and resolve her, shall we say, tax differences.
Oh, I see.
All right? And she simply did not accept those positions. Now, whether she didn't accept the positions based upon the advice of a guy like Sam Rosenfarb, who's a forensic accountant, who said, well, this is what you owe the government, or she just decided that no one was going to tell her what to do, I don't know if we'll ever know that.
How much did her attitude affect this? I mean, she appeared to come across arrogant, you know, really kind of above the law, at least from what we could pick up. How does that influence both the media and I guess the legal system in trying to handle and deal with her? I think that may have played a big part in people wanting her to be, you know, sent to jail.
I think that's a major issue for the judges in sentencing, and most judges have to take the consideration of remorse into consideration. I think the way the media portrayed it, and the media played a very big role, as they do in many sensational cases. It was very difficult for anyone to see any remorse from her, the way the media portrayed it. I haven't personally had a conversation with her, nor have I ever had a conversation with the judge who sentenced her. But I think that case is a clear example of a case where a judge could have been very creative in sentencing her and really making her restitution, making her repayment to society.
And this is based on her style and attitude. You said if it had been maybe different,
right,
maybe the judge could have been a little bit more creative. I think the taxpayers are the people who are the most upset about what happens to Leona Helmsley. Just like we looked at the Zoe Baer here situation, and now we got our leading candidates who may be running for governor, who potentially are having some problem with the illegal aliens. I listened to some radio shows. Most people were upset about the fact that they did not pay the taxes. I think what I'm asking here is really what is the impact on our society and these types of things that we're finding? I mean, is it measurable? I mean, I heard you just give some statistics. Is that really why we should be more focused in on trying to get some tough rules or regulations?
One of the problems of white-collar crime is being able to quantify the losses and being able to determine how the crime was committed. The criminals in these paper trials, paper crimes, have unlimited amount of creativity. Leona Helmsley, for instance, from what I read about, she was directing suppliers to change invoices, to divert supplies from going from hotels to her home. I've been involved in one case where a supermarket owner hired a manager to run his store, and it was in Carteret, and right here in New Jersey. And the store just kept losing money. And he couldn't understand why the store was losing money. He had his accountants check the records, check the books, check the supplies, and he couldn't figure out why the store was losing money. And he called us in, and we sent accountants to examine the records and examine the books. And we spent 2 weeks, and we couldn't figure out why he was losing money. And then one of my partners, Keith Balla, went to look at the store. And you know, he's a real Sherlock Holmes type. And he happened to notice that there were 6 registers in the front of the store. And just through recollection and sometimes just dumb luck, he recalled that only 5 registers were reporting sales on the books of the company. And so this manager had 1 register, which was for himself, and the other 5 registers were reporting sales for the owners of the store. That's extremely creative. To be able to install a register in a store that's not hooked up to the central computer system of the store is phenomenally
And Al,
imaginative.
there's one element that runs through a lot of the white-collar crime cases, and that is arrogance. And that type of arrogance is specifically the type of example that just was given. The belief that they're never going to get caught, and if they do get caught, and I think that's really the focal point of your question, if they do get caught, not much is going to happen to them because they've previously led exemplary or so-called exemplary
Yeah,
lives.
because oftentimes we have people who are real leaders in the community. They are, really pillars of their neighborhood and their church, and, they're very well-known, recognized people. And I think they are able to garner a certain amount of sympathy at times and support. But as the economy has been changing and we're getting this real, I think, difficult situation with the middle class as far as them being able to survive and keep their heads above water, I think we're really starting to get people more outraged. And that's why I'm really trying to find out, where are we going in this country, in this area? Is there anything happening in Congress or in the courts that are going to begin to let people feel? See, at least in street crime, if you do X, there's a potential of Y. I'm not so sure in white-collar crime, if you do X, that you think anything may happen.
Well, you see, one of the roles that I play as a lawyer in white-collar crime cases, one of the first rules is that the lawyer who is anonymous is probably the most effective lawyer. The most
Explain that now.
The most clear example currently is the case involving Justice Wachtler from New York. Now, Judge Wachtler is represented by counsel. I dare say that there are very many people who know who the lawyer is who represents him. Happens to be a colleague of mine from New York. He's the type of lawyer who keeps a very low profile and attempts to resolve cases before they get out of hand. And one of the clear rules of most white-collar crimes lawyers is you find out after the crime has been committed and you immediately proceed to the U.S. Attorney's Office or the prosecutor's office, whichever the case, and you try and establish whether or not you can make some rapport with the prosecutor and try and work something out if, in fact, there's a problem that's occurred.
I mean, out-of-court settlement is still a room.
It's a different ballpark, Al.
Okay.
That's negotiating the criminal side of things.
Okay.
Always with a view, and this is what white-collar crimes lawyers are faced with today, and that is keeping a look over their shoulder for any possible civil penalties. And that's where Sam comes in. On most white-collar crimes cases where there's money involved, will engage someone like Sam immediately to establish what the numbers may be, what the exposure may be. Because if I can go into the prosecutor's office and say, here's my accountant's report, here's the damage, we're coming forthright, open, and we want to put our souls at the feet of the court and say that we've done something wrong, it works out a lot better that we've done the work with a forensic accountant than if we went in and said, well, we're going to leave it to you, and that we start arguing over a lot of details.
Is there any information on the percentage of time our courts are, tied up now with white-collar crime compared to, street types of crime or violent crime?
In the federal sector, there's the Administrative Office of the Courts in Washington, D.C., the Judicial Center, and that office keeps track of those statistics. I don't know what the statistics say, but in the state courts, I believe that there is the amount of violent crime, crimes against persons, they're called, far outnumbers the white-collar crime. In most prosecutors' offices, which Sam has been in, and when he's dealt, there's always a white-collar crimes or business crimes section.
Okay, but didn't the Attorney General here in New Jersey, Del Tufo, actually increase his workforce in the white-collar crime area as far as the number of investigators since he's been in that post? I'm pretty sure he...
Well, now it's Attorney General Dauber, but he had done that. Others had done it before him, but they've gone in different directions. Sam is well aware, as I am, of insurance fraud. Is a very major issue in this state with the amount of premiums that people have to pay. The biggest problem that they've put a lot of energy towards are people who register their cars in New Jersey, but in fact live in New York. And that has gotten a very, very big play And what's been interesting is I've had to bring in forensic accountants for those types of situations to establish just how much money the client, in fact, gained by having his car registered in New Jersey, but keeping the car in New York. And as part of any plea bargains that have been negotiated, they have insisted a restitution for that amount of money to the state of New Jersey into a insurance fund.
See, my role in the...
Before we go now, we're going to run out of time. I want to talk about a couple things real quick. One is the Crazy Eddie case. I mean, most of us kind of felt good about Crazy Eddie watching his commercial over the years, and then we find out years later, yeah, he really wasn't.
Right.
Might have been.
He was
insane.
the American dream, Al.
Yeah, tell us about that, and because I know it's going to be in our headlines a lot in the next year.
Apparently, Crazy Eddie ran a business with his family. Apparently, there was a great deal of cash. Cash was taken out of the business. Cash was not reported as income, as Sam and I have discussed it. Crazy Eddie took money that belonged to the stockholders, secreted it for himself. There was an overall, the allegation is, failure to report the actual workings of the company.
Now, that doesn't affect the public sector or the public, the community.
That may be the impression, but it actually does.
It actually does because of the taxes that are...
Well, it actually does in a number of ways. One, the stockholders of Crazy Eddie stock, which was a public company, were defrauded.
Okay.
And they lost money. And so to that extent, the general public did have a stake in that loss. In addition, there are tax fraud claims against Crazy Eddie for not reporting the tax that he personally absconded with, if he did. I assume he did.
Is his children going to really be hurt in that type of case? I mean, this seems to be a case that maybe, they may not have been the biggest thieves. I mean, do we get into who's the biggest thief in these types of situations?
There's a theory in all of these cases, Al, that says if you got the benefit of the gain, then we ask you, the government, if you're representing the government, to disgorge or give back those monies that you got. So to the extent that the monies may have gone to his children's benefit or to his family's benefit, or they've secreted funds, those funds are going to be probably demanded to be retained. In the Milken case, he was ordered to give back and give to the government as part of the plea bargain the phenomenal sum of money of $550 million.
We're going to run out of time here, but before we go, a little bit about the Newark Sanitation Department, which is kind of a new hot scandal going on here in our local
hot area for me, because our firm has put in a proposal to get the job of evaluating the internal controls at the Sanitation Department.
Real quickly, what happened then?
Well, we don't know what happened.
Okay. What do you think happened? I mean, the Newark Sanitation Department appears to be...
Well, we read about what happened.
Yeah.
Well, what was reported in
Yes.
the papers was there were private arrangements made for the pickup of garbage in the city of Newark with certain haulers who had reputations which the Deputy Attorney General or Attorney General's office did not like. The charges for the picking up of the garbage were inflated. The taxpayers paid those prices without anything being put out to bid or any normal business process being done. And the people who were controlling the award of the bids were the ones who were benefiting by apparently side payments.
Gentlemen, we're out of time. We're going to have you guys come back and spend some more time. I know there's a lot more for us to learn. But I want to thank Sam Rosenfarb, who's a forensic accountant and one of our lawyers here in the Newark community, Mr. Peter Till, for joining us and talking with us this evening.
Thank you.
I'm Al Bundy. Before we go, I want to dedicate this show to Dizzy Gillespie, who we're all going to miss, but his music will live on forever. I'm Al Bundy, and I will see you next time.